Agility and resiliency is something I've been talking about in my organization for some time. And the impact of it being the new supply chain, I think, is what makes this so important and so relevant, especially for this audience. I I think to myself whenever I talk about what is this new supply chain, the fact that there's a lot of us that are already tired of this new supply chain, just given the challenges that we have. So many people right now are having to accelerate their ideas about being a shorter, more nimble, simplified supply chain. I'm going to take you and walk you through what we're doing at Rockwell, how we're thinking about our priorities across our integrated organization. When I think about agility before I get started, it is where we started our journey. Resiliency has become the core of our supply chain strategy, though. I mentioned before this idea of how we integrate control and information. It's really about from the shop floor to the top floor and then across the enterprise. And that again leans into my comment about just making our customers more productive and more sustainable as organizations. I'm going to shift over and talk to you a little bit about how we define our integrated supply chain as an organization and what that means for us, because this is our end-to-end organization. And this essentially is my team. Organizationally, for years, we were known as the operations team. We pivoted about a year ago away from operations and toward integrated supply chain, or ISC as we're known now, because we felt it better aligned ourselves and our organization, our team. I wanted to lay that out for you because that kind of sets the stage for as I look to pivot into how we think about what I'm defining as this new supply chain. I'd like to start by walking through and level setting on the challenging conditions that we're all dealing with in one way, shape, or form, but give you my take on it as it relates to Rockwell Automation. When I typically talk about these conditions, I always start by sharing that even before the pandemic, we were dealing with quite a few and quite some very significant macroeconomic challenges, right? We were dealing with constrained markets. Just a few years prior, we were constrained with electronics just differently than we are now. We were dealing with a constrained market from a logistics perspective. We had intermittent labor challenges. Spot pricing continued to be a challenge. And global protectionism in the form of the US-China trade war was really a challenge. And it was forcing us already to think differently and start to think about, is this lean supply chain the way we need to go? Is it the right way for us to think about the future? Then you fast forward to what is the pandemic. My answer for this, as we were going forward, was really around thinking about agility. And this was my answer to the macroeconomic challenges that we were seeing. And that's why you see we've captured here those pictures that were on the left. But as we thought about it, it wasn't a matter of thinking of agility from a buzzword perspective. It's really about thinking of it as it's defined here. How did we manage the kind of upticks and fluctuations with demand, but to ensure this right cost, service, and quality, given the introduction of what I'd say are those external marketplace factors that I just talked about, and our internal decisions. And those internal decisions that I'm referencing, that's the strategy of our organization. What are we trying to do? How are we thinking about M&A? How are we thinking about product lifecycle? All of this was already calling into question, was the lean supply chain appropriate for us? And what I've highlighted here on the left are the elements of agility that we thought were important and most pertinent to us as we thought about the supply chain that we wanted to be. Then as you fast forwarded to the pandemic, resiliency came into play. And while I can tell you openly that agility was very much an offense, resiliency is a defense. And it really pivots you toward thinking about how you mitigate this impact of disruption where you have potential points of failure. What we've had to stress as an organization, more resiliency means more capacity. And when I say more capacity somewhere in your supply chain, right? You might have to design it in with flexibility of your component selection. You might have to think about it relative to how you buffer from an inventory standpoint. You might have to build in redundant manufacturing, redundant capacity. But all in all, you've got to think about how you leverage capacity to your benefit. We've tried to mention it from Rockwell's perspective and want people to think about it as it's insurance. What are you looking to protect for? How much are you looking to protect against? And what does it mean to you? What does it mean to you and your organization? And I've started to ask the organization a question about how do we then think about that investment and honestly be a bit proactive about what can we do to still benefit customers as we're building in this resiliency. The challenge for us is that this COVID driven environment has just been immensely taxing for everybody and across each of the supply chain functions. It doesn't matter where you are, but this expectation hasn't changed. And that's why I've stressed to my organization and will continue to the work that needs to be done. It has gone from working hard to trying to think more strategically to now just being relentlessly focused on prioritizing and prioritizing how we get the most value out of our initiatives to work our way through this until we finally start to see some normalcy.